see what happens when she comes back.
Oh, it said recording in progress.
Yeah.
You're on.
Now it's giving me an option to go live on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. So feel free to let them in whenever you want.
Okay. Can you guys greet them while I'm messing with the technology?
Sure.
Sure.
All right, there's 4 people. I'll let them in now.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
We're working out a couple of little glitches here on the live streaming, so bear with us. And Mike.
Good morning.
Thank you, John, for your efforts to try to get Jay. Hard person to pin down.
Customer service is not one of his strengths.
Hi, Janet. Dave, good you're here. Hi, Ken. And Robert, of course. Dave, we're just working out a couple little technical glitches here before I'm not sure how many people are going to be attending this. It's kind of an optional meeting for the task force, so
Okay.
we'll just wait a few minutes.
Sounds great.
So did people watch the council work session? Some nods, some shakes of the head. Don't blame you at all. Whoa. There's a raven about to attack you, Ken. Hey, Connor.
Good morning.
I'll try a different animal.
Are those caribou?
They are. Memories of Alaska.
Hi, Tom. We're just waiting for all of you who are just joined us. We're just waiting to for Kim to get the live streaming. It looks like it's recording, Kim. Is it?
Hi, everybody. Yes, it is recording. We are running into some permissions issues on live streaming it to YouTube. So I think what we'll do instead is we'll just post the recording online afterwards so that the public can have access to this meeting. But otherwise, we're ready to go, and I'll pass it back to you, Patricia.
Okay. And I think people might continue to join as we go along, but I just let's just get going here. So I'm very happy and grateful to have Dave Wortman here with us today to kind of walk us through what the state is up to, and then we'll have a question and answer period after he does a presentation. So Dave is the statewide sustainability officer for the state. He provides sustainability, technical, and policy leadership to state agencies, local governments, and the public. He collaborates with the governor's office on executive orders and state policy, and coordinate statewide enterprise efforts for implementation of sustainability practices across Oregon state government. Finally, he identifies and develops funding opportunities to support state efforts for sustainability and acts as a state liaison to tribes, local governments, universities, utilities, and federal stakeholders. So with that, Dave, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, quick sound check. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Make sure everyone can see that. Is my screen showing up? Excellent. Okay. Let's see here. Go that way. So I want to thank you for inviting me to this. I see some familiar faces from our Mid-Willamette Sustainability Networking monthly events that we have. And I'm really excited that Salem is doing a climate action plan. I think that's great. I really commend you for taking this on. And I had a chance to look at your task force membership, and wow, you're a big group. So that's impressive. You've got a lot of different representation from the community, which I think is excellent as well. So Patricia had asked me to do about a 20-minute presentation on kind of what happened in our legislature this year with respect to climate issues. And so I've got some slides here to just summarize some of the highlights of some of the bills that were signed. I know that I had a chance to look at some of your climate action strategies already, and I saw that there were some reference to bills already in there. So Kim and Veritas Group have probably already done their homework, and some of this may be repetitive. Hopefully some of it is a little bit new, but look forward to having some discussion. And, you know, I'm by no means an expert on every single one of these bills, but I'll do my best to share what I know and give some insight, and also talk a little bit about maybe some of the other things that are happening within state government that aren't necessarily related to new legislation, but are ongoing efforts that may help your climate action planning efforts. So with that, I'm going to go ahead right in. And do you want to wait? Okay, well, I'll just dive in, and we'll do some questions at the end. So just a little bit about what we do at DAS Sustainability. And as Patricia mentioned, we work with all state agencies on, a lot of it's based on operational sustainability. So what's happening within their internal operations. But a lot of it is also working with our Oregon Sustainability Board, which is made up of members appointed by the governor. Our Secretary of State is our chair now, and they meet quarterly and talk a lot about various statewide projects, as well as working with agencies on their sustainability efforts. We write energy and resource conservation policy we just finished, and we're working on some sustainable design guidelines for our buildings. And we support implementation of executive orders and other legislation affecting agencies. And we try and lead by example. So we're actually developing our own climate action planning tool right now for agencies that will help them measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions in their own operations. We want to lead by example, even though our agencies may not be necessarily our hugest emitters in the state, but we want to make sure that we are doing what we are asking others to be doing. So quick overview of the 2001 legislative session. There were a lot of climate related bills that were brought forward. It was a very strange session, to be honest, between the virtualness of it and the other issues that we were facing, equity. And that led to environmental justice being centered in a lot of the bills that were either passed or introduced. We had a lot of provisions around transportation electrification, and I'll share a little bit about that. And again, COVID and a really catastrophic 2020 wildfire season really led to a lot of shifts around emergency response and wildfire response. It took up a lot of time and attention, rightly so, of legislators. So it was again a kind of a chaotic session, but we were able to get some really good bills passed and signed by the governor. And I want to say too that along with the legislation that's in here, the governor signed Executive Order 2004 in the spring of 2020. That was a really landmark executive order, and I have a link for resources at the end. But a lot of agencies continue to work on responding to that executive order. So even though they're not tied necessarily to legislation, there are a lot of things happening within state agencies that could be informative and potentially helpful for your own climate action planning efforts. I know this was mentioned in your strategies in a number of places in your strategy spreadsheet that Patricia sent me. This was House Bill 2021, the Clean Energy Standard. So it's requiring our two biggest investor-owned utilities, PG and Pacific Power, to basically reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity sold to Oregon consumers. So it sets a really aggressive timeline, one of the most in the country, if not the most, to get to 100% below baseline emissions by 2040. I said it applies to our two largest utilities. It also restricts new site certificates for fossil fuel-based energy facilities. And it creates a really nice $50 million fund that's through the Oregon Department of Energy. To help plan and develop community, more forthcoming from Odo and exactly what that grant looks like, what the requirements are, but certainly that is something to follow for potential funding for you folks. And then it also permits utilities to collaborate with local government, so like Salem, on green electricity rates that might align with your own clean energy goals. And I think that was mentioned as one of the strategies in your spreadsheet. So that's also a nice provision of the bill. So great game changer. This is kind of a substitute, I would say, for the prior 2 years where we tried to get comprehensive climate change legislation passed through and weren't able to do that. So we have rulemaking now for that through the Department of Environmental Quality. And then we have this now Clean Energy Standard bill that passed. Another one that's maybe not so flashy and sexy, but also but is really helpful and practical is HB 2062, which is standards for consumer products. So basically, it establishes energy efficiency standards for certain appliances. So offered in the state, and basically this aligns with. But if you look at the estimates of energy efficiency or greenhouse gas reductions from it, we're looking at nearly 50,000 metric tons in 2025 and over 100,000 in 2035. And essentially what this did is it aligns our appliance standards with those in California. We often are the little brother following the big brother on a lot of these things with respect to list of the products covered. Portable electric I think is kind of an interesting one in that list, but covers things like water heaters, shower heads, commercial dishwashers, and so on. HB 2019 covered renewable energy facilities. So it, again, this is a little bit of a wonky one, but it modified the definition of renewable energy facility for permitting purposes. And it was basically a legislative fix. There was a consequence from an earlier bill that triggered a requirement for notification of landowners. So essentially, this makes siting renewable energy facilities through our Energy Facility Siting Council a bit less bureaucratic and a little more streamlined. This was another big one, transportation electrification. So House Bill 2165. And it requires our electric companies that make sales of electricity to 25,000 or more retail consumers collect fees to support transportation electrification. So installing chargers and basically fleet enhancements. You folks may have heard from Veritas Group that 36% or so of our total emissions in Oregon come from our transportation sector. So this is really a significant one. Those funds can be used again for charging infrastructure as well as other consumer costs. What those costs are exactly, I'm not quite sure, but at least for the charging infrastructure, that's an important one. And so it also extends and expands the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program here in Oregon, which provides incentives through the Department of Environmental Quality, essentially rebates for purchase of electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. I know I have a plug-in hybrid and was able to get this rebate. It extended the rebate. It actually, I think it increased there actually two parts to this. There's the rebate itself, and then there's also for low-income folks who are low income, and it increased that rebate as well. So it's really trying to make EVs more affordable for everybody, and particularly those who are low income. House Bill 2180, EV ready building codes. So our Department of Consumer and Business Services, which is where our building codes division lies, are directed to amend the state building code to require that new construction includes provisions for electric buildings, providing that electrical service capacity for vehicles for no less than 20% of the spaces. So as I understand it, it may not be necessarily a charging station itself, but you at least have to have the capacity there installed for future chargers to be easily installed. And the nice thing too is a municipality can actually require newly constructed buildings to exceed the minimum bill requirements. So if Salem chooses to, you can actually go above that 20%. And it applies to commercial buildings under private ownership, multifamily buildings. Unfortunately, it does not apply to townhomes, which is what I have, but that's okay. It actually is a great step forward in terms of incenting that EV ready charging. HB 2842 is the Healthy Homes Program, and this is established in the Oregon Health Authority. And really, this is to provide grants for financial assistance to low-income households, to replace assistance to landlords to update rental properties. And the nice thing is that repair and rehabilitate includes energy efficiency improvements. So it's not just healthy from a perspective of mold and lead and that sort of thing. It's actually includes energy efficiency. I don't know size of the grant pool for this, but OHA budget to see how much is in there for this grant program, but just know that it is there for energy efficiency improvements. This is a lot on this slide. So essentially changes to the public purpose charge. This is the charge that helps fund our Energy Trust of Oregon programs. The good thing is it extended the program for another 10 years, but it did reduce the charge to our utilities, PG and Pacific Power, down to 1.5% of revenues collected from ratepayers, and maintains support for renewable energy, low-income weatherization, low-income housing, but it moves a lot of the sort of more, I guess, cost-effective energy efficiency work and funds those programs basically directly from PGE and PacifiCorp. So this is all kind of a restructuring of where the incentives are going to lie and how they're going to be structured. My sense is that Energy Trust will be changing a lot of their programs to align with this. and some of those more common efficiency elements will be taken out. But it also provides language for funding distribution system technologies. So it could be things like battery storage or microgrids or things like that, which is a nice addition. And then it also establishes equitably, as we mentioned earlier, that the theme of equity is found through a lot of these bills.
Hey, Dave. Dave, sorry to interrupt, but the sound keeps going in and out on your mic. So I'm wondering if maybe if you turned off your video, if that might help the sound quality.
Have you been hearing most of what I'm saying? Or
yeah, it just kind of goes in and out,
okay.
I think. But yes,
okay.
we've been listening. We've been hearing most of what you've been saying. Just
Okay.
you don't have to start it over.
All right, let's try that. So HB 2475, this is related to energy affordability. Again, this addresses that equity issue again. So our Public Utility Commission can consider different rates based on energy burden. About a quarter of our Oregon households are energy burden, meaning that they spend a disproportionate amount of their household income on energy in their homes. So this allows PUC to provide technical assistance to organizations that represent those customers. And so between the rates and the technical assistance, it really is trying to address that energy burden in our communities. So this one is really not something that is going to necessarily directly impact your climate action strategies now, but just know that these studies are in the works. So a couple bills that directed special studies. So the Department of Energy is going to be looking at developing about 3 gigawatts of floating offshore wind projects by 2030. And then they've also been directed to conduct a study of the potential benefits of renewable hydrogen or hydrogen created from renewable energy sources in Oregon. So both of those studies will recommend paths forward or feasibility, and will probably lead to next steps. But right now, they're just studies in themselves. And then I wanted to mention this SCR is a Senate resolution. So it establishes an environmental justice framework of principles for all of our agencies. And essentially, it says that we're all supposed to consider and prioritize environmental justice and equity issues when we are carrying out our responsibilities as agencies. And it really supports a lot of what's already going on. So I noticed that the Climate Equity Blueprint was mentioned in your strategies several times. That is a document that we are currently in the process of implementing internally in our agencies. We have our Environmental Justice Task Force. We are talking a lot internally about climate and equity issues. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, but it is something that's of high priority. And so this resolution just basically reinforces that, yes, the Senate thinks this is important and directs us to keep doing that work. And then this one, I don't remember if you talk about waste reduction and recycling in your strategies. You do? Okay. So this was actually this was a big win, I think, for Oregon in terms of our recycling, our misfunctioning recycling system. I won't say broken, but it really helps modernize our system. I give a lot of kudos to our Department of Environmental Quality Materials Management Program for getting this bill put together. But essentially, there are a lot of moving parts here, but it establishes basically a producer responsibility program for packaging, printing, and writing paper and food serviceware. Producers will have to pay fees and join producer responsibility organizations as members. Those fees will be used to help with things like education, expanding recycling access to all parts of the state. creating an auditing program of recycling processors to make sure that they're producing clean and marketable end products, and making sure that those recyclables reach responsible end markets and don't end up getting disposed when that wasn't the goal. There's also a truth in labeling on what's really recyclable. So you can't have the chasing arrows on a product in Oregon if it's actually not recyclable, or you can't say recycle this if it's not recyclable. So this bill is really trying to clean up that confusion, create a standard market in Oregon for what's recyclable across the state, provide that recycling infrastructure access across the state. And hopefully this will make some big improvements in what's actually getting recycled. While this isn't legislation, also right now, in fact, there was a public hearing last week. The Department of Environmental Quality is in the middle of their rulemaking for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Their climate protection program has a bunch of what they call covered entities that will be directed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time. It prioritizes emissions in environmental justice communities. It has declining and enforceable limits on greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels, natural gas utilities, suppliers of gasoline, diesel, and kerosene. And there are a lot of other details that are going on in the rulemaking. I was just looking at the modeling study for this. It was really interesting. Under all scenarios that they looked at, there were significant health benefits, economic benefits. There weren't any scenarios that were going to be a significant detriment to our economy or health or any of those things. I would encourage you to go to this webpage. There's a lot there, and there are, I think, some future hearings coming up. So if folks want to participate in that, the comments on rulemaking, you can find that on this webpage. So I also just wanted to mention potential issues for future sessions. One of the things that came up this year, it didn't quite make it through, was a provision called Buy Clean Oregon that would require disclosure of embodied carbon, which is the carbon in the stuff that we consume. So in this case, it was concrete, steel, and asphalt were the things that were mentioned. So how much carbon does it take to extract, manufacture, and bring to market a material like concrete? It was going to be a pilot with our state agencies. It had industry support. It just didn't make it through. I think with all the other legislative priorities, it didn't quite rise to the top. But there's already talk about bringing it back next year. And I also want to mention that we, as the state of Oregon, in our procurement program, are prioritizing and analyzing different goods and services for their embodied carbon and trying to address that because we buy a lot of stuff, and of course other public entities can use our price agreements to buy things. Integrating climate into Oregon's climate planning goals, that was another thing that came up last year. I know that's already being addressed, and you mentioned this in your Climate and Equitable Communities rulemaking, which is currently underway to look at greenhouse gas emissions in transportation and land use. But there was some discussion about actually changing the planning goals. So just another thing that may come up in future sessions. And then here's some helpful links. I would encourage folks to go to the Governor's 2004. There's a long list of reports from agencies on their plans of what they are going to be doing to respond to the executive order. There's also a legislative session report that was put together by Department of Energy that is a really helpful synopsis of what I just talked about today. And then there's a legislative summary report on energy and environment that talks about not only the bills that were signed that I mentioned today, but also some of the ones that failed, so things that may be coming back in future years. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. So you want to open it up for questions? I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you so much, Dave. We really appreciate you being with us today and providing this overview of this very important legislative session, it sounds like. So we'd like to open it up to the floor now. I think we're a small enough group that you could simply unmute yourself, maybe turn your camera on, or you can raise your hand like John Savage just did. So John, go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for the presentation. Question on I don't know how much more information you have, but to me, you mentioned the Community Renewable Investment Fund, the $50 million. Do you know what kind of projects we're talking about and, process or who is the contact person at Energy?
I don't know who the contact person is. I believe that it's for projects that are 20 megawatts and smaller, which is still, a good sized project. So other than that, I don't know if it has any criteria for siting or anything else like that, but I would imagine that those criteria will be developed by Odo over time. So I don't have much more right now.
Okay. And these would be city. And these would be city-led or tribal-led projects.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can certainly try and find a contact for you at Odo if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay.
I mean, that's money for the city of Salem for
Absolutely.
potential projects. So
yeah, I will also mention, just as a side while I'm thinking about grant funding. So we at the Department of Administrative Services, we got a PGE Renewable Development Fund grant. We're putting in an array out in our fleet and parking services site out on Airport Way. Much a smaller grant, but I mean, we got a $500,000 grant for that, and we had to put up 15% of it. So again, and those grants, about 50% of them are funded. So just another one to think about for future projects.
Dave, quick question. Could you stop your screen sharing so we can see the group a little more clearly? Thank you.
Great
And
idea.
there we go. And it looks like Janet has her hand up.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, so the 100% clean bill, it covers investor-owned utilities. And so I'm wondering how much of the 7 natural gas power plants does that actually cover? And what are we going to do about the other merchant natural gas power plants in the state of Oregon?
Well, that's a good question. I can think of, I'm not sure how many of the 7 it covers. I would say probably a good number of them. But and it's a good question what to do about the other ones. But I think, it was a matter of at least getting the 2 biggest utilities on board to agree to the standard and working with other smaller utilities as we go along. But I'm not quite sure. I can find out for you if you'd like.
Yes, I'll follow up with an email.
Okay.
Other questions?
I also just wanted to say, maybe this is for Patricia or Kim or both of you. I did look at all of your strategies, albeit quickly, and there were a couple of other ideas that struck me of things that agencies are doing. You may or may not be aware of, but I would be happy to go through that list and just sort of make comments or something, or suggest ideas if you'd like, of resources I might know about, or agency programs, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We'd love to take you up on that. Thank you very much, Dave.
Okay.
So I had a comment, more of a comment than a question, maybe directly to Dave. The ODOT came out with a study here in June. It's called the Oregon Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, or TEINA. You just search TEINA, you'll find it.
Yep.
It's a 174-page document, but it has an executive summary. And basically, it was a study to determine what is the electric vehicle charging infrastructure needs, especially charging stations and by type of station is needed. And it goes into great detail about it. But just to know that there was this need study done, and I'm sure that need study is going to align pretty well with what the state is doing, but also hopefully what local governments are doing, so they can collaborate on going forward. So if you're interested in that particular topic, I highly recommend you take a look at it, and hopefully this group will also, as a city, integrate any of these ideas into its plans.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very valuable document. And just so you know, that there's a group that is meeting monthly called the ZEVIWIG, which is the Zero Emission Vehicle Interagency Working Group. And so trying to carry on some of the work that was identified in that needs analysis, work on funding, implementation, that sort of thing. So efforts continue, not just stopping with the study.
Great. Janet, do you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask in general, what do you see cities in Oregon doing that are kind of giving them the biggest bang for their buck in terms of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions?
Oh boy, I in my role here, I work mainly in state government, so I'm not necessarily in touch with all the cities like that. I think that your consultant in your strategy matrix, does a good job of identifying those things that are a good bang for the buck. So I know one thing is, we've been talking about internally is purchase of working directly with our utilities. But I mean, I think they're, all these things really fit together, the land use issues, reducing demand. The one thing I mentioned to folks too about vehicle electrification is, I think it's great, but we still have issues with vehicles themselves in terms of people driving, we're still going to have traffic, not getting out of the cars and using active transportation and that sort of thing. So electric vehicles are part of the answer, but to me, they don't address all of the issues in terms of a healthy community. Anyway, that's kind of that's a very broad question. So yeah, there's just a lot that could be done.
Great, thanks, Dave. Dave, I think we're still having a little trouble with your internet connection. We're, again, mostly hearing you, but it's kind of dropping out. But I think it was better when your camera was off. So if you wouldn't mind doing that. We hate to not look at you when you're talking, but it's better to hear the important things you're saying.
I'd rather have you hear me than see me.
Okay. Okay, John, did you have a second question?
Yes, this has to do with where are we here? You're muted. Okay. Yeah, Dave, this has to do with state government's own use, for buildings, for vehicles and all that. You mentioned it's a small part of this total state, but it's actually a fairly major user in the Salem area. And so my question, and so it counts against emissions in Salem, which is what our plan is about. So the question I have is, do you have targets of emission reduction targets for energy use in state buildings and fleets? I mean, carbon emission reduction targets, like over time, so that it's eventually goes to zero.
Very good question. So, so my agency, DAS, we actually set carbon emission targets for our own buildings and fleets that align with our state governments, so we can lead by example. And we are tracking those every year. It's a key performance measure that we have to report to the legislature. So we've committed ourselves to doing it and taking action. The climate action planning tool I mentioned earlier, at the very beginning. So what that is meant to do is for all of the agencies that are listed in Executive Order 2004, And all of us have been asked to make carbon reduction a priority in our planning, our budgeting, our operations, our decision making. And so this tool is basically going to allow us to do inventories of mainly of our buildings and fleet, but also some of our procurement activities, commuting, if folks want to look at that, to set goals that at the very least align with the state's goals, if not more aggressive, and then identify strategies and report annually on performance. And so starting next year and thereon, our office is going to be putting together an annual report showing how our agencies are doing. So I expect that we'll have multiple agencies, including most of our biggest ones, setting those targets and committing to reducing emissions in their buildings and fleet. Like I said, we're also targeting a couple of different procurement categories that are our highest carbon intensity. Folks will be able to look at commuting and some other things as well. So do we all have targets now? We do have some various energy efficiency targets for our buildings. They don't have necessarily a date to them. So hopefully this will make things a little more transparent and accountable and time bound. At least that's my hope. That's my intention.
Great, thank you. Michael, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was covered, if you had mentioned this when things were breaking up or not, but will there be evaluations on the impact of these measures discussed to see how effective they are?
Are you talking about the particular pieces of legislation?
Right, yeah, some of the standards you had set or had mentioned, are any of them specifically going to have some sort of evaluation piece to see, if they're effective in what their intent is through the measure?
Yes, and I don't know if I can go through all the bills, but the clean energy standard, for example. So our Department of Environmental Quality is tasked, they do our statewide greenhouse gas reporting. So they're going to be tasked with monitoring the progress of these utilities to those deadlines that are in the bill and reporting on that. So there is accountability to those utilities, PGE and Pacific Power, to actually stay on task with those greenhouse gas reduction goals for their electricity production. And then the PUC itself will also be reporting on progress. There are some opportunities for those utilities to take a pause or do a slight diversion or whatnot if there are significant impacts to ratepayers or to electricity reliability, those sort of things. But both of those agencies will be monitoring and reporting on the progress toward that clean energy standard. So that as one example.
Okay, great.
And I would say most of them do have an accountability component to them, like a report back to the legislature or some sort of agency directed to report.
Patricia.
Kind of along that same topic, Dave, is there going to be a spot where we can go to kind of keep track of all these various moving parts? Is your website or your the DAS website the best place to kind of keep track of all these things? And then I guess kind of a second part of that is, how do you recommend that cities in general stay up to date on what's happening at the state? Is it through the Council of Governments? Is that the best way?
You know, I wish I had a good answer to your first one. Because there are so many different agencies involved. PUC, I'm sure will have a section on their site about the clean energy standard and progress. I'm sure DEQ will have some update on their site. ODOT is they will keep track of the transportation needs analysis. Is there one place that would be a wonderful thing? I kind of wish that the governor's carbon policy office had sort of all things climate, kind of pulled together on one page with here's the progress and how we're doing. But I don't think they're tasked with that right now. But that could be a nice request, you know, for the city to make, to state government to provide that. And in terms of, you know, who would be the best resource to check in on that, you know, we do have, if you're talking about legislation, kind of where things are at, I mean, we actually have a legislative affairs person in DAS, you know, that can speak to folks about this kind of thing. I'm certainly happy to come back every year or more periodically than that to give you updates if you'd like. You know, again, it's hard. We work in silos in government, you know, and I'm sure you folks experience that as well. I see a lot of nodding heads. So often not one person accountable for things, but I'm happy to be as helpful as I can.
Thank you. We'll probably take you up on that offer.
Okay.
Any other questions for Dave? I wanted to let the task force members know that you're going to be getting an updated version of the strategy spreadsheet later this week. And we have currently about 7 strategies that speak to several of these new pieces of legislation. And they are noted as such in the strategy list themselves. And so those will provide a clear way for the City of Salem and agency partners to continue to track progress and to align with these standards. Because, you know, as you may see, just because the state passes a goal or a measure or a new policy, it doesn't mean that it actually happens on the state level. So we need to make sure that the City of Salem is actually enacting and moving the needle forward to make sure that that the city and the state can meet those new targets. So anyway, when you see the new strategy list, you'll see those particular bills called out by number, and you can assess those.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Kim, just that some of these things are going to be subject to rulemaking. So the Recycling Act sounds great, but it's going to take a couple years, you know, 3 or 4 years to implement realistically. So don't wait for us.
Right. Any other questions or comments for Dave? Janet.
I've heard that the climate and equitable communities rulemaking has a lot of rules that they're going to roll out that cities need to comply with. So like green dense areas, like a specific percentage within the urban growth boundary. So I'm wondering, like when are cities going to get those rules, and how does he see those, you know, affecting cities?
That is a great question, again, for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I hate to punt, but I have not been involved in that rulemaking process. So, but certainly they would be the ones who can talk about the timing and impacts. And I don't know if you've been to their website. There are 3 or 4 people that are contacts there at DLCD that can probably answer your question way better than I can.
Julie.
So I just wanted to chime in on that question. So I'm on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, and then Lisa Anderson Ogilvie with Community Development is also my alternate on that committee. And I listened to the LCDC meeting last week as they discussed it. Right now, they are targeting May of 2022 for adoption. They are rolling out draft rules for each of the different rulemaking advisory committee meetings. And so at this point, we probably have about 2/3 maybe of the draft rules that we've been reviewing. So I think that we will be tracking that, trying to make sure that, you know, what's being required at the state level helps us to advance our climate goals and move forward with that. So I think the final rules would probably be published. I don't quite know the rulemaking timeline, but if they're looking at adoption in May, then I'm guessing they'll be published by February-ish. So that's all I have to add.
Great. Thanks for that clarity, Julie. All right. Well, if we don't have any additional questions, I think I can hand it back to Patricia maybe to close us off.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you again Dave, for attending this meeting, and we will definitely try to stay in touch with you to keep track of some of these things, and there may be follow-up questions that people think of later that if you don't mind, we can pass to you. And keep those updated on our website as well. I know kind of people need to think about some of these things and maybe take a look at some of those websites. So if you don't mind sending us your presentation, then we can also post that on our website so people can view that. That'd be great. And I don't have anything else. I guess just for the task force, Kim, they should also be expecting the draft plan in mid-October, correct?
Well, we're actually planning to send you the draft climate action plan this week. And then it will be, you get a sneak preview before the
that's
public.
Public.
And then it will be released to the public in mid-October. It will still be a draft at that point, but.
And so Dave, if you have time to take a look at our strategies and want to propose different wording or something new, we're still open for suggestions. So feel free.
Yeah, I probably won't have, wordsmithing things, but more, I was just thinking of ideas to offer resources or, to link you with other things to help implement some of those strategies.
Great.
But I will take a look at those this week and offer whatever I can. And then I will send the presentation, and I have two questions here. One about the gas plants and their location, as well as any more details on the renewable energy grant program from ODO, the $50 million one. And I'll see what I can find out about those. And I'll send those to you, Patricia, and then I guess you can distribute to the folks.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm really sorry about the audio quality, but hopefully, we're in Zoom world, so what can you do?
No problem.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thank you for your great work. Keep it up.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much for
Dave.
joining us, Dave.
You bet.
Bye, everybody.